Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer. It is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, what I wanted to do is look back at the Private League announcement that was made back when the Private League feature was introduced, and go through how things have worked out, and a couple of proposals that I've got to make it better in the future. So firstly, Private Leagues, if you've never played with one, they were introduced in Betrayal, and they're an interesting feature that either allow groups of friends or guilds to play in an isolated economy and or impose hard modes on the game. And there's a number of publicly available private leagues, say for instance, so one that I'm running, which has a number of mods that make the game harder. It's Solo Self-Found Legion Softcore, with monsters act 20% faster, players have 40% less resistances, and all items drop scoured, so magic and rare items don't drop. They drop as white items instead, and monsters have multiple projectiles. So it's a number of mods that make the game harder, but in my case, it's not really aimed at making it feel completely unfair. There are also publicly available private leagues like Streamer Raise QT's League, which is called No Lube because it is designed to feel unfair, and people seem to be having a lot of fun with that, and there's people that have managed to make it with basically every difficulty mod in the game, have managed to make it high into the 90s on a hardcore setting. Now, the league mods that can exist can only make the game harder, and this precludes a number of things that people have suggested in the past, like there's the Exiles Everywhere mod that's existed in various short events in the past, where every zone has 20 rogue exiles added. This accelerates loot acquisition, so even though it makes combat encounters more difficult, it also makes players more powerful more quickly, and so that's not one of the mods that's allowed. They need to be unambiguous hard mods, not things that have a significant benefit to player progression as well. Now, hard modes can make the game feel more intense if they're done right, and they can make it feel more unfair if they're done wrong. And I want to go through the mods that exist and discuss the ones that I think fit into each category. So currently we've got two types of mods. Some of them are derived from the BLAMT races that used to exist in Path of Exile's early history. I think the last ones of these that came out, that happened, were about the time that Malachi was added to the game, so Act 4. And BLAMT stood for Blood Magic, Lethal, Ancestral, Multiple Projectiles, and Turbo. And basically they just amped up monster stats tremendously. Blood Magic meant that players had the Blood Magic Keystone allocated, which is a pain in the ass when enemies do so much damage that you're having to spend your life instead of your mana on skills. Lethal just is a huge multiplier to monster damage, plus 50% damage and 50% off physical added as extra fire, cold, and lightning damage. So it's a tremendous boost to monster damage. Ancestral means that there are totems everywhere, just like the map mod, and diamond totems, of course, are very dangerous for this sort of scenario, where one crit, even from the weakest of monsters, can kill you. Multiple projectiles does exactly what it sounds like. It's plus 4 projectiles on all enemy skills, and Turbo is exactly what it sounds like, but the numbers are very high. 60% increased movement, attack, and cast speed for all enemies. These mods were so hard that most players that entered a Blamped race did not see Avail, and many players did not even see Fire and Fury in the coast, in the second zone of the game. So the other type of mods that we have are Iron Man derivatives. Iron Man being a optional player set, a player-inflicted hard mode rule set that was used in Diablo 2 back in the days when Diablo 2 was the leader of the action RPG genre, so we're talking early 2000s. I think that game came out in 99 from memory, but anyways. Iron Man was a rule set in Diablo 2 where you could not interact with vendors in any way. And part of interacting with vendors in that game was to purchase potions, basically be the equivalent of refilling flasks in Path of Exile, and the other part of it was repairing your items. Items that were used took damage over time, that damage built up, and then you needed to go back to town, get them repaired, or else you needed to replace them. And in Iron Man, you weren't allowed to get them repaired, so you would have to replace them. Created some interesting strategic gameplay where you'd be thinking, oh shit, I'm really taking a lot of damage here, but I can't use a health flask because I'm going to need it soon. Or you would be thinking, I've got this great axe that I've just picked up, but I'm going to need it for the Countess boss. or for Andariel, so I'm going to have to put it aside and I'm going to have to use a much weaker one for clearing trash. It's a really interesting and strategic rule set. But the ones that came from Blamped are the monster life increases. There's a mod for plus 20% monster life and a mod for plus 40% monster life. I'd like to see a third tier of this that is much higher, and I'd like to see that for a reason that is that white monsters don't, and magic monsters don't live long enough to retaliate in this game properly. And you can confidently get surrounded by a bunch of white monsters in normal gameplay because you're aware that you can just mow them down with one skill. If these monsters had enough hit points to survive, then they'd be able to retaliate, their skills would matter, and you'd have to take them seriously. So for that reason, I think for this mod, there should be a third tier of it. And the specific tier that I would propose is plus 5% per zone level. So this is something that at low level doesn't cause monsters in the ledge to have an extraordinary amount of hit points. It's only 30% there. When at the point where player attack speed is so low that this would just feel like combat would feel sluggish if you had to hack through white monsters in the ledge that had 5 times the normal hit points. But by the time you get to maps, this actually is 5 times normal hit points. White monsters are going to live a long time. Maybe they'll survive a couple of hits. Magic monsters are going to live long enough that their mods are going to matter, and mods that are not just the Nemesis Soul Eater, not Nemesis, Bloodline Soul Eater, and it's not called Soul Eater on them, is it? It's Union of Souls, and the other Bloodlines mods that are similar, that make one monster much more durable. Things like the Bloodlines Cannibalism mod would be really significant there as well. Rare monsters, of course, you then often feel like, oh, do I really want to fight this thing? It's got an enormous amount of health. Maybe I'm just going to run away. And sometimes you're going to think you're going to be able to get away and you're going to get that decision wrong, and you're going to end up in all sorts of trouble. So I think that could be really interesting at high level. And it would also deal a little bit with the amount of player damage inflation that's happened over recent leagues. So if you think back to when the Shaper came out, if you played then, people generally thought that the fight would last long enough that you would have to manage 10 or 12 volatile anomalies. Whereas nowadays, players are killing the Shaper literally within 5 seconds of him spawning. So, in this mode, the Shaper, being in a level 84 zone, would have 420% more hit points, so 5.2 times as many as he has in the normal game, and that means that I think you would recapture that feel of the Shaper taking long enough that 12 volatile anomalies might well spawn. Second mod that comes up is the monster move attack and cast speed, so the more sensible versions of the turbo mod. 10 and 20% of the figures that are in the game. I'd be keen to see a higher version of this that is 1% per zone level. I'm not sure how well that would play at very high level, but I'd be willing to give it a try. Next up is reduced player resistances, 20 and 40%. This is an excellent mod actually in practice. It transforms and slows down player gearing, and it imposes a much higher opportunity cost on using unique items as well. I'm really happy with the current state of this mod. I wouldn't mind seeing a third tier of it that is 1% per zone level, but I don't think it needs to change. Next up, there are the two that increase the number of one-shots. There is 10 or 20% increased monster damage, and there is 15% or 30% of enemy physical damage added as extra damage of each element. I don't really like these mods. I feel that they don't add tense moments to the game, they add more unfair feeling moments. They cause you to spend longer times grinding lower tier content in order to protect yourself against one-shots. To build up to be tanky enough to protect yourself against one-shots. So I don't find them particularly satisfying. That said, there's certainly people that play them. Raise QT's League has both of those mods in place and seems to be pretty popular. Next up, there are the item affecting mods that are inspired by Diablo 2 Iron Man. So you have the no stashes one. I've never used this. I've heard it is absolute chaos when it comes to mapping, and I can imagine that. So it basically feels like the core game through the axe, but then once you get into mapping, you need to hold your map pool with you. So yeah, absolute and utter chaos, pandemonium, madness, but it seems like it's a bit of fun for people that, as the announcement says, this one's for the true masochists, and it seems like people that are in that category seem to like it. Now there's this mod, no magic or rare items drop. So basically what this means is that a scouring orb is applied to every item before it drops. I really like this mod. I really like the way that it plays, but I don't like the way it interacts with one or two of the league mechanics. So the league mechanics that this interacts badly with are the Incursion Temple. The fact that this works on the Vaal Omnitect is a real disappointment, and so because the Vaal Omnitect, the main reason that you fight them is for the Incursion Temple drops, which are rare items that contain one mod that you couldn't otherwise get. Likewise, the Tier 3 upgraded versions of some of the rooms contain an item that has a magic item that has a rare mod on it. These are not available again in the in leagues that have this private mod. So basically, this neuters the incursion mechanic pretty close to entirely. I think that this should change so that, or perhaps there should be two tiers of it. One where only act bosses can drop magic and rare items, and then another one where all items drop as it currently is. And act bosses would then be, so that would mean act